those same questions come to us in a different perspective when I think we hear Peg speak. Peg, of course, is a professor of philosophy at DePaul University and has specialised really in the work of Hannah Arendt, but in that has really drifted much more broadly, and it's become very evident to us. This is the second year that Peg's been with us at the Whitlam Institute for a short stay. And a lot of these gatherings bring together political theorists, lawyers, philosophers like Peg, historians. And I'd have to say that there's a certain richness that seems to be coming out of that exchange. And so it's with great pleasure that I asked Peg to give us a philosopher's point of view.
Thank you, Eric. So I thought I would frame my remarks, and I think that they actually follow from Martin's, but perhaps emphasize a different aspect of democracy, and perhaps aren't as philosophical as they might be, but hopefully they will rise to that occasion as well. I want to take up two questions that Eric has posed for this evening's discussion on democracy today with an eye to the future. One, can democracy develop or flourish except as it is bounded, contained, and framed by the constitutional state? Martin's already mentioned that, and the second one also mentioned, can direct democracy deliver? And I want to take up these two questions with two examples that, in my view, speak to at least one central challenge of democracy today, and that is namely the rise of the security state. So I decided that just to frame the discussion, I would show two images of two recent covers of Time magazine. The first is from the week of July 22nd, 2013. The cover states, "The world's best protesters, the world's worst Democrats," referring, of course, to Egypt. And important here, to my mind, is the dichotomy the cover makes between protest and democracy. The second cover, from the week of June 24th, 2013, oh, I didn't get there yet.
Other way.
You see it, it's the Informers.
You're clicking in the wrong direction.
I'm going in the wrong direction?
Yeah.
We'll get there.
There it
So
is.
this
There it
really
is.
democracy
Okay,
got
great,
central control
great.
here.
Okay, I've never put anything technological in my hands. All right, so we have here the cover of the June 24th, 2013, which states the Informers, sorry, it's a bit blurred, with the photo of Edward Snowden prominent against the photos of Bradley Manning and Aaron Swartz. And striking here, it seems to me, is the reversal of the typical use of the sense of informers. Usually this term refers to an individual who secretly spies on other individuals and privately reports the activities to the authorities such as the KGB or the CIA. So I think traditionally we've understood that. It's interesting here that the informer is an individual. I'm speaking here specifically of Edward Snowden, who publicly discloses the secret spying activities conducted by the state. And I think that reversal of the public and the private bears thinking about when contemplating democracy and the security state today. Now, as is well known, in Snowden's case, the disclosures were revelations of the national security administrations in the US in domestic and foreign surveillance programs, revelations that disclose the possible abuse of executive powers and the violation of the citizens' Fourth Amendment rights to privacy. As is well known, Snowden's revelations were swiftly met by the US General Attorney, Eric Holder, who charged him of being a traitor. Leading US senators, including the liberal Democrat Dianne Feinstein, calling him a rebel and his activities treasonous. And most recently, on Friday, just past, August 16th, President Obama, during a national press conference, announcing some limited reforms of the NSA stated, and I quote, "Edward Snowden is not a patriot." What brings these two covers together in my mind is the suggestion that democracy is something other than, or at least does not include, acts of protest or acts of whistleblowing. The Egyptian street is not democratic. Edward Snowden is not a patriot. In both cases, the protests and the whistleblowing were met with swift responses, respectively, by the Egyptian military and the Obama administration, both of which justify their actions in the name of counterterrorism and state security. And by the way, as I go forward in these brief remarks, I want to say up front that I'm not condoning the Muslim Brotherhood, nor do I see them as, quote, the peaceful warriors of democracy, as some of their members have called themselves in recent days. But nevertheless, just thinking about democracy, which is, I think, a very contested notion, I want to land in thinking about democracy by recalling that modern democracy began with declarations of independence and revolution against political oppression of established states. And if we recall that, then these two examples present in differing ways, to my mind, the challenge of democracy today, namely the security state which disallows acts of civil disobedience and protest in an effort to totally secure and stabilize the state. So while I agree with Martin that certainly stability and stabilization, security are legitimate political concerns and certainly concerns of the democratic state, I also want to suggest here whether democracy can flourish or even claim to be a democracy if acts of protest are deemed illegal and shut down by the state. But lest we make it too easy for ourselves, we must also ask what makes a protest democratic, because that seems to me something that we need to think about when we're thinking about democracy today. So just very briefly then, 2 points. First, using the example of the Egyptian protest, it seems to me that the challenge direct democracy faces if it is to deliver, and by that I take to mean something like delivering a peaceful, secure, and free political space. The challenge of direct democracy, and by the way, I agree with Martin that I think that it's impossible, and you'll see why in a moment, is that if there is going to be anything like direct democracy, and let's take the notion of the street, then it seems to me that for democracy to flourish, we must move from revolution to the tradition of civil disobedience. Let me briefly clarify what I mean by civil disobedience by citing Hannah Arendt, who puts it this way, and I quote, "Civil disobedience arises when a significant number of citizens have become convinced either that the normal channels of change no longer function and grievances will not be heard or acted upon, or that, on the contrary, government is about to change and has embarked upon and persists in modes of action whose legality and constitutionality are open to doubt." End of citation. While this may sound as if Arendt is describing revolutionary acts, the difference between revolutionary protest and civil disobedience, to my mind, is that the latter accepts the authority of the established frame of government and the general validity of its laws, while the former do not. In other words, civil disobedience accepts that modern democracy is characterized both by democratic institutions such as an independent judiciary, the free press, divided government, diversity, and a public space that permits public dissension. What distinguishes revolutionary acts from acts of civil disobedience is that the latter takes place against the backdrop of what Tocqueville calls the consensus universalis, the consent to the Constitution. And in this way, I agree with Martin and wonder whether direct democracy makes any sense insofar as democracy seems necessarily to include both institutions and a space for political dissent. At the same time, and here I turn briefly to Edward Snowden and the US security state, democratic power, and Martin pointed to this just a moment ago, ultimately resides in the people. The potestas in populo, the authority of the people. And here I am relying on John Adams, who argues that in a democracy, there is first of all a horizontal alliance between the citizens which mutually bind them and which then give rise to the establishment of the state. And I think he's referring there to the civil alliances and civil institutions and associations that Martin has mentioned in his discussion of Tocqueville. This means then that the potesta resides with the citizens rather than the sovereign. In other words, and this is the distance between John Adams and Thomas Hobbes, the citizens are the original repository of potestas because they are constituted first through the horizontal alliance rather than Hobbes's notion of the people being constituted through the representational persona, the legal mask of the sovereign. This means, following Adams, in a democracy, citizens pledge their support to the state, support that they are authorized, they have authorized themselves to withdraw that support through acts of civil disobedience. And here, just to mention the long tradition, this doesn't just come out of modern democracy, but we could look to the Roman Republican notion of the provocatio ad populum, and this was the tradition in which the plebes had the constitutional right to air their grievances. And again, by 300 BC in the Roman Republic, this right to air their grievances by the plebes had become an established constitutional right. And it seems to me that one of the greatest challenges to democracy today is when the state, in the name of security, does not acknowledge that the citizens are the ultimate repository of legitimate authority, and therefore the state, and not recognizing that, does not recognize the legitimacy of civil disobedience. And this is what I think is happening with both the Egyptian military, which is almost inseparable from the Egyptian state, and the state as it's come to be understood in the United States. And here I'm not thinking not only of Obama's remark, Edward Snowden is not a patriot, but the state crackdown on Occupy, as well as the protest against the Iraq War, to name just three. And again, I don't want to collapse the Egyptian situation with the U.S. situation, but I do think the similarity there is this crackdown on protest in the name of the citizen. So in summary then, let me make this my last point. I suggest that democracy today and in the future, the challenge we have is how to reinvigorate the tradition of civil disobedience. And again, I want to note that means that the revolution must become civilized, but how to reinvigorate the notion of civil disobedience such that we have a public space in which the best protesters are the best Democrats. Thank you.